Hey, this is Tim Ashe, President of the Vermont Senate, here with my daily update on Vermont's response to the pandemic crisis we're facing. With each passing day, it feels like it's been a year's past. Today I'm going to walk through a couple short-term updates and then talk about something that I've received perhaps more anxious emails and calls about than any other topic, which is the issue of relief for self-employed people. And I'll provide some updates that aren't final in the sense they're working through Congress, but they are pretty much able to be taken to the bank in light of the quick reaction of the U.S. Senate voting 96-0. I think that tells you the House is going to pass it as well. So I will get to that in a moment. Also talk about some of the support that businesses will be receiving as a result of the federal law that's working through. Another area where many people have asked, what is Vermont capable of doing to support small businesses? And while we will work on strategies, we have always known that the federal government is the biggest player in terms of cash support to the states. To put that in perspective, I'll just remind people who, especially those who weren't watching yesterday, that we expect to receive between $1.25 and $1.5 billion from the bill that passed the U.S. Senate last night, assuming it makes it to the finish line, which we have every confidence it will. That is an enormous sum of money, and it isn't like we just get a check and they say, hey, have a lot of fun and use it wisely. Funds are broken up into different categories that we have to use properly, and so it's not so straightforward that we just get a blank check, but I want to talk about that. Then I'll give you a sense of some ways that you can keep track of what's going on in state government tomorrow that I think will be very informative and give people a real sense of what the scope of our response is going to be. So the first thing I want to start with on a somber note, which is really what this whole crisis and our response is about, which is that Vermont is now up to 158 positive tests, and 9 people have passed away who were infected with COVID-19. So we keep them in our minds as always and recognize that it is to keep those numbers as low as possible is why we're all going through what we're going through right now. Also want to recognize that sometimes we see a spreadsheet and it says 158 positive tests, 9 people have died, and it's easy to reduce people to numbers, but obviously each one of those people who have died is worthy of recognition for him or herself, and all the people who are sick are struggling individually. So we have to remember that these numbers on spreadsheets represent actual people that we may know or may not know, but each is really owed by all of us a recognition of their individual selves. So I want to also talk, I've mentioned about how our unemployment office is usually has a trickle of claims for new unemployment applications over the course of a week. Vermont has had one of the lowest unemployment rates in the United States for 5-6 years. And just to indicate what a sudden shock it was to the system, and this has all happened now in just about a week and a half, maybe slightly more. In the week we're in right now in March last year, so in 2019, the number of new unemployment applications in Vermont was around 500. This year, in the last week, it was 14,500. So 500 last year this time, 14,500 this time. That number is likely to go up way higher because we know many people have been trying to get through the phones and haven't been able to because there have been so many people calling in that the lines have been busy. So that 14,500 is likely to get much greater, and it just puts in perspective, you have a number of staff people used to handling 500, and that multiplies by 30 basically overnight, especially with the restaurant industry and schools closing basically in one day. So as you're talking to the people on the phone or interacting with people online in order to get the unemployment benefits you desperately need, be compassionate, because the person on the other end is someone who is already overwhelmed with the volume of work. They're trying to be as patient and dutiful as possible. calculating how much each person is eligible for is not something that's just as simple as a quick 1-2 punch in a calculator. It takes a little bit of time, so please be patient with the people who are looking at that. Now I'm going to get to the heart of it right now, which is many people have contacted me and my peers in the legislature, and presumably the governor's office as well, saying, okay, it's great that the legislature has expanded the unemployment pool so that people get expanded benefits if they're an employee, but I'm self-employed. What does that do for me? As we know, the unemployment system is an insurance pool, just like I pay my premium to Blue Cross Blue Shield so that if I get sick, the policy will pay out. And someone who's on MVP can't say, hey, Blue Cross, pay for my coverage, because they're not in my Blue Cross Blue Shield insurance pool. So the unemployment system has been paid into by employers and employees who have that conventional relationship. Self-employed people and independent contractors are outside of that system, and so it's not so straightforward when we have a terrible economic crisis like this to just say, oh, we'll give everyone the money that was only paid into by those who are in the insurance system. So it's been very dissatisfying over the last week and a half to tell people who are self-employed that we really need the federal government to step up and provide massive resources to help you in particular. So it's been frustrating because people are worried right now about paying their bills, and they don't want to hear, let's wait 2-3 weeks or something. The good news, if there is some good news, at least in terms of the responsiveness of the federal government, is that the bill that passed 96-0 last night through the U.S. Senate includes support for self-employed people. This is going to be very, very good news. I'm going to gloss over some of the finer details, but basically say that the federal government is establishing basically a look-alike of the unemployment system. So the Vermont state unemployment system will continue to only pay out directly for people who have been employed by an employer. However, we will now have access to dollars from the federal government which will pay self-employed people the equivalent of unemployment benefits using 100% federal money. This is a very, very big deal because that means that people who right now have seen their incomes go to zero and can't count on the unemployment system will be able to get the cash they need to be able to pay their bills. Now, there will be more information we'll learn in the next couple days about who precisely is meant by self-employed, who is meant by people who are part-time, and what's meant by people who don't normally qualify for the unemployment system. These are terms that are used in the actual federal legislation. I practically popped my eyeballs out reading the bill before I got on. So there's much we need to learn in the coming days. But the good news is that all indications are that self-employed people and independent contractors and what the federal government calls workers in the gig economy, whatever that means, will all be eligible for this new benefit. The new benefit for those who are self-employed, gig economy, independent contractors, whatever the federal government is going to, whoever they're going to apply that to, they will effectively be getting benefits on par with those who are participating in the normal unemployment system. The difference is that the money will be coming 100% from the federal government. It will not get pulled out of Vermont's insurance pool. Now, the self-employed, the independent contractors, and the people who are in the regular unemployment system all receive some substantial benefits as a result of the law that Washington's about to pass. First off, the number of weeks someone will be eligible to receive these benefits has now been extended for normal unemployed, but also extended to those who are self-employed for 39 weeks. This is pretty similar to what it was like during the Great Recession. So 39 weeks is far longer than most people would normally be eligible. I think that indicates how long it's believed that some industries in particular may be facing this crisis and inability to get back on your feet. Another bit of good news whether you are, I'm referring to people as regular unemployed, meaning people who are using the unemployment system right now, or people who will fall under this new federal system, at least as we understand it today, in addition to the normal paycheck or the wage replacement check you're going to get from the unemployment system, will get $600 a week. $600 a week on top of the weekly benefit that you would otherwise be entitled to. So for many people, I mean, I've heard from artists who say, my income just went to zero. Now you will likely be able to get a weekly benefit paid for 100% by the feds based on what you have earned over the last period of time, averaged out. That's how they calculate these things. So you're not going to get rich on this, but you will get a benefit, and then on top of that, $600 a week. For many people who have had no idea how they're going to pay their bills, how they're going to pay their rent, how they're going to pay their mortgage, they're being eligible for this weekly benefit plus the $600 is going to be a very, very significant deal, and I'm very grateful that the Senate moved quickly last night, that the House, I believe, is voting tomorrow. I expect that the President would sign it as soon as tomorrow night, which means that by the beginning of next week, we will have clarity so that no matter what kind of Vermonter you are who's seen your income drop, you will immediately be able to kind of go one of two directions, either the conventional employee or the self-employed, and it'll be pretty straightforward how much money you're going to get. But I think it's great news that we're going to get this $600 check out to people through the federal government. So details about how all that application will occur are going to be forthcoming, but we believe that that whole system for self-employed people will go through the Vermont Department of Labor, but you will be taking money from a different pot, if you will, that has come from the feds. Questions about whether it includes small business owners with no employees yet to be determined. I have put in a request through Senator Leahy's office. There's language which describes people who might be eligible under this new category of federal support who would not otherwise qualify for unemployment. And so we need to see what the scope of that definition might be. So more information to come. I'm partly relieved to be saying this because for all of the last 10 days, so many people have contacted me and others so nervous about how they're going to pay their bills, whether there's going to be any relief for people who are outside that normal employer-employee situation. And at least knowing that there is help on the way, I think, is a great comfort. And I know that it's still going to be hard for some people to ride out the period of time between now and when they get the benefits, but it's at least good to know that help is coming. I also want to point out that there is an additional bit of support. This is likely to be in people's hands by, I'd say, mid-April, which is just, let's say, 2.5 weeks away. What the federal government, I guess, needed something catchy. They call it a recovery rebate. These are direct payments to people throughout the country. It will be a $1,200 check to virtually every person who files income tax form. So $1,200 to virtually every person who reported income last year. Married couples would get $2,400, so you'd get the double. Then, on top of that, there would be a $500 per child additional recovery rebate, to use their term, for any kids younger than the age of 17. So, just for repeat, every single person who reported income last year is likely to receive, well, let me put it differently. It is income adjusted. Virtually every Vermonter is going to get some money in a direct rebate check. Between the income, for one person, income between $75,000 and $99,000, the rebate starts to phase down. But anyone less than $75,000, as we understand it, will get a $1,200 check. That is a refundable check, which is a very important thing, so that even if you reported no tax liability, you still get the $1,200 value. For couples, they will be eligible up to $198,000. So just like the personal income phases out beginning at 75, for couples it'll start phasing out at 150 and discontinue above 198. Most Vermonters will get one of these checks. This will be a nice boost for many people who have had to go through the last week and a half with less income, and even when they start getting benefits, they'll have had that lag, which may make paying bills a real problem. I've had several people ask, will people who are on Social Security get this check? Yes. If you reported income last year, you will be getting one of these rebates. Also, there are some people who are on the lower end of the income scale, but who are working and who are on Medicaid. It's important to know that the unemployment benefits I've just described and this recovery check will not be counted towards your eligibility for Medicaid. So don't worry about receiving the federal support, that it will kick you off of the health care you have. It will not be counted for eligibility for that. So I hope that is somewhat comforting news for many people out there who have been very worried about where they're going to find any support in the days ahead. It is, I can only tell you that I've been on the receiving end of many hundreds, possibly more than 1,000 personal communications in the last week of people describing what they're facing and wondering how government's going to help. And so as I describe the availability of benefits for people who are self-employed, the expanded $600 on the top benefit for unemployed people, and the checks that are going to go out to everyone, it feels like the sum total of those 1,000 or more communications I've received, I can tell how much benefit it's going to have for people. So for those of you who've been waiting, I'm glad to say that Congress finally got its act together and seems to be responding and helping people just when they need it most. Many small businesses have also been dizzied each day trying to figure out how to make which decision in terms of either keeping people on the payroll, putting people on the unemployment system, partial unemployment. People have been trying to figure out all sorts of strategies to both keep people on board if they can, be ready to come back out of this whenever that occurs, but also are draining their businesses' reserves if they have any. What I'm about to tell you doesn't solve the dilemma of trying to figure out what the right business decision is, but it does put another tool on the table, which I believe will be very, very helpful. There is a new, what is being called employee retention credit. This is the federal government's desire to have businesses keep as many people working as possible. And I would put you to sleep talking about the details at the moment. But let's just say it's a fairly generous cash refundable tax credit for businesses of 50% of each employee's wages up to $10,000 per quarter. So here we are thinking about the first week and a half of this crisis. It tells you something that the federal government is designing a tax benefit for businesses to try to keep their employees engaged that imagines a 1 quarter, so 3-month long period. So for any small businesses who are out there who are trying to figure out how to make it work to keep people on board with a reduced amount of work, I really encourage you to stay tuned to what's being called the employee retention credit. My assumption is that the various business associations in Vermont will all be trying to get as much information about this as possible in the coming days when it goes live. So I think it's a really positive opportunity for many small businesses who do not want to take out loans right now, because that's the last thing they want to hear about. So I'm going to transition just quickly. I've heard from several people some really concerning information about price gouging. Now, sometimes people maybe think what they're seeing on the shelves is price gouging, but maybe there's some other explanation. However, when you hear about some of the products that are in short supply being sold in sort of individual unit amounts when it's normally bundled together and being sold at extremely high prices, you know when it's price gouging when you see it. And I know there are instances that people are seeing and reporting to me. So one of my appeals to those watching is that if you are at one of the stores who has been given the green light to stay open, which of course is not all businesses, many would like to stay open but can't for the interest of public health. If you see something on the shelf which you see as multiples of what it is usually sold for, please let me know, because we are going to start keeping a tally so that when we get to the other side of this, we will give the Attorney General whatever resources are needed to go after anyone who has ripped off people at this time. Most Vermonters, of course, the vast, vast, vast majority of Vermont businesses are not going to try to rip off their neighbors right now just because people are desperate to get certain items. However, if you see it, we have to put a stop to it, because this is not the right time to take advantage of people. Also, if you're a healthcare provider or anybody else who continues to operate and you see that some of your suppliers are jacking up the prices, some of them might do it because they've got virtually no supply left. Others are doing it because they think they can get away with it. Also, if you're in that category, please let me know. I will take an inventory. We will make sure that these things are investigated, because I'll tell you, it is just unthinkable that someone would use this opportunity to make a ton of money off of people who are suffering. So I feel very strongly about that. It's not so easy to simply go like that and make it stop. But what we can do is verify when it's occurring, so that after we get through all this, we can go after people and hold them accountable. I'll just keep it simple. Tomorrow at 5:30, I'll be back. I'm going to do something like what I did last week, which is like a mailbag edition. So I've received so many questions, it's been impossible to respond in real time to all of the questions that are coming in. So I'll pull together as many as I can and offer the best responses that are available to me based on either what I've learned over the course of the week or information I can find between now and tomorrow. A couple things that may interest you in terms of what's occurring in your state government at the time being. First, tomorrow at 1:30, the Senate Finance Committee and Senate Appropriations Committees, these are the two committees we call money committees. They are the ones who decide what gets spent and how the money comes in. They will be having two reports coming in at 1:30. The first is a discussion with State Treasurer Beth Pierce to better understand how much capacity we have to pay our bills in the coming months. So that will obviously be very critical. So that's at 1:30. Immediately following the Treasurer, a number of our staff fiscal analysts will be talking about the bill that is working through Congress now, and also the one that passed last week, which had some initial relief in healthcare dollars from the federal government. They will be talking about how those bills are going to play out here in Vermont. Anyone who wishes to watch that in real time, if you go to the legislature's website and you go to the committees links, you'll see Senate, go to Appropriations. That will tell you where you can watch it live on a YouTube channel. So it's actually been quite remarkable in a way that in the face of all of this difficult conducting of business, we've in a way made the work of the legislature more accessible than it was before when the State House was operating. I'm not trying to say that I don't want the State House to open up again, but in the meantime, people, if you're home and have the interest, you can really get a great understanding of how the state really works. Also, our Judiciary Committee tomorrow at 1:30, for those of you who are interested in how this is affecting the criminal justice system in all, well, not just criminal justice, but also our judiciary. This would include everything to what happens to custody cases when the courthouse is closed, what happens to in the event that someone who's impacted by domestic violence needs immediate help from government to protect herself or himself. That all of those things our courts have had to change almost on a dime to try to figure out how to manage these really most important cases. And so at 1:30, our Judiciary Committee will be taking a look at that. So in closing, I guess I'll end where I began by saying that it is tempting sometimes when we look at these charts that seem to have proliferated during this crisis with the number of infected cases in different countries and different states. And each day, it's almost like people are looking at a ticker tape. Oh, well, there's 8 people dead. There's 1,000 now in the country that are dead. And there's a temptation to think about it only in terms of numbers. And maybe it won't be a bad day if tomorrow there are fewer deaths in the country, or we only have 1 in Vermont. And I think it's important that we all remember we're making so much sacrifice right now, and our federal government is going into who knows how much further debt to try to solve the economic problems we face and healthcare problems. But the reason all this is happening is because we value every individual life, and we have to resist the urge to look at the number of people who test positive or the number of people who have passed away as just numbers on a spreadsheet. And we have to remember that each of those people was an individual. They've got family, friends who are suffering the loss of one person. And so I just hope that we will all continue to have that in our minds as we endure the coming days with whatever it throws at us. So with that, I'm going to sign off. Send me any questions you hope I can get to tomorrow when I do my mailbag edition. I don't mean to make light of the situation, but I do think it's helpful to kind of clear my head of some of the questions that have come in. And so tomorrow I'll focus exclusively on that. I might also have an update on what's going on in our schools for the rest of the school year. I'm not 100% sure, but if I have that handy, I will share it at the time. So thanks a lot, everybody, for tuning in, and I hope to have you back tomorrow.